If you feel you've had your fill of eco-zealots, then this album might not be your bag, as the planet is put squarely in the frame. Let's get into it, shall we? Gary Numan was described by Enemy as one of pop's hardened doomsday preppers. I mean, we've had albums that have explored the relationship between man and machine, and dystopias that where that line is fundamentally blurred, dealing with themes of alienation and isolation amid the burr and buzz of that synth sound and that androgynous sneer of his. He's been the chart-topping suburban android, but on this he becomes almost the apocalyptic eco-warrior. We no longer ask ourselves, do androids dream of electric sheep, but instead we're plunged into a kind of a Mad Max hinterland, where even the planet now is fighting back and seeing the human race as a kind of a virus. The album I'm talking about is this one, Intruder. Of course, I figured that perhaps we are the intruders here. Similar themes were explored on his previous album, Savage Songs from a Broken World. I think that came out in 2017. But this album is a brooding meditation on revenge, if you like, where the protagonist, as I've said, is essentially the planet. Enemy says it's like Greta Thunberg has visited the goth disco. But if ecological collapse is your bag, then this album may well be your cup of fair trade tea. Personally, I'm more interested in just how awesome he still sounds, and this album does sound pretty bloody awesome. Heavy industrial electronics frame or form the atmosphere and tone of this record, a record that's based on a poem written by his 11-year-old daughter. Is it Gerald Bostock Mark II, possibly? It's an audacious concept, no longer questioning the idea of humanity. The idea of humanity where robots become agents of destruction. A bit like Styx, Mr. Roboto, but not really. The Styx album was more a high-camp Broadway production, but rather than the tits and teeth of Broadway, Numan's work was far more menacing and authentic in that respect. It had this throb and menace of it, heavily influenced by Kraftwerk and late 70s David Bowie. But this one ramps up the terror, if you like, where the planet is pissed and fights back. Wonderful tracks like Betrayal, I Am Screaming, It Breaks Me Again. I mean, it says it all, doesn't it? I realise that this might sound incredibly naff, but believe me, it isn't. If you listen to the album, it kind of all fits into place. You kind of get it. It unfolds, it develops, it's atmospheric and cinematic, where just as the best of Numan's work usually is. Wonderful choruses, especially on the single Saints and Liars, sleazily paced anthemic, stark analog synths, and a myriad of references to his classic sounds. This album was partly written during lockdown, yet another lockdown album. There'll be a whole subculture of those explored and examined in many years to come. Yet its dalliance with electronica makes it sound quite, I'd like to say futuristic, but I don't like that word used to apply to Numan's work. I like to think of it as sounds very now. It's certainly rooted in Numan's trademark dalliances with Moog synths and industrial textures. If you could imagine Nine Inch Nails entering Eurovision, I think you might have an idea what this album sounds like. One of my favourites on this is Black Sun. It's this piano-led lament. It's like a Depeche Mode influenced howl of despair. And long-term producer, of course, Aid Fento does a wonderful job on this album, balancing the fluctuations between a storm of noise emerging from these chilling, sinister soundscapes. Whether it's the frenzied percussion of the title track or the windswept and forlorn Now and Forever. Numan has always sounded slightly out of time, even when Replicas came out in '79, which was a kind of austerely futuristic in many respects. He's always grated against the current narrative in many respects, appearing very, very chilly and brittle against the overt foppery of the New Romantics. But of course his music with Tubeway Army predates all that, and was seen as an interesting antidote, or interesting divergence away from the snarl and spit of punk. But as I said, Newman's always seemed to be kind of out of time, but with this album, Intruder, he seems to be very much seizing the zeitgeist, which is one of generations seeing as a kind of a global terror. You can take this album as a foreboding, foreshadowing of dreadful things to come, or just a highly imaginative piece of industrial pop. Betrayed, the album opener, has a distinctly biblical feel to it, with the dark vocal combining with the choral refrains and those deep synths. It immediately establishes a sense of loss, a sense of betrayal, and a profound sadness. It certainly establishes an effective platform for the continuing cry and torment that echoes through the rest of the songs, 12 songs in total, I believe. The next song on this album is one of my favourites, actually. If I may quote Simon Buckley from Louder Than War, he says, "The next song, In the Gift, with its delicious Arabian-themed chorus, conjures notions of Newman as an impassioned wise man, a traveller shouting down a corrupt king in his indulgent court, creating a sense of chaos that falls across the threatening background layers, orchestral in their ambition and execution." All these songs take us on a journey from moments of rage to respite. Numbers like Black Sun and End of Dragons allow a temporary reprieve from the global spleen venting, before ladling on more of this synth-driven darkness and despair, as the ruined planet ferments and rages throughout the album. Fans often criticise this album on the grounds that he was just kind of repeating Splinter and Savage, the albums from 2013 and 2017. However, although there is a continuation of tone and atmosphere, I feel Intruder is an album that demonstrates an evolving maturity. I particularly like Aid Fenton's tight, multi-layered production on this album, which places everything within the mix absolutely beautifully on this record. This is an album that I enjoyed much more than I thought I would, as it's effectively an album told by a storyteller. There are little sonic allusions to his classic 80s catalogue. If you're not a fan of Newman's darker, heavier material, then this is probably not going to be for you. You're probably better off just dusting off your copy of The Pleasure Principle. Anyway, you've been watching a video of my classic album review. If you've enjoyed this, please do click like, subscribe, and check that notification bell so you don't miss out on anything. Check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at the channel. It's always much appreciated. Become a Patreon, why not? There's a fine body of work on there now. Anyway, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, as you know, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.